Hello, this is David Rouse, and I'm speaking to you today from my house near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. By way of introduction, I'm a landscape architect and have worked for many years as an urban and regional planner. Two of my areas of expertise are green infrastructure and smart cities, the focus of my presentation today. I will start by covering green infrastructure, its definition, the benefits it provides, and its application in Philadelphia as an example. I'll then move on to smart cities. Again, its definition, connections to green infrastructure, and I'd like to finish up with a few thoughts on the opportunities for green infrastructure provided by autonomous vehicles. By the way, the upper image that you see on the screen is of live oaks on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, Lighthouse Park in Pascagoula. I learned about the Gulf Coast through my work as project manager for the Biloxi Comprehensive Plan, prepared more than 10 years ago now following Hurricane Katrina. Live oaks are a form of green infrastructure, and the recovery from the damage caused by Katrina is a sign both of their resilience and of the importance of nature for sustainable cities, something to remember in this time of advanced technology. So let me start with green infrastructure. There are two definitions of green infrastructure in common usage. The first, older definition, refers to a network of open spaces such as parks, greenways, and natural areas at the scale of a city or a metropolitan region. This definition actually dates back to Florida, the Florida Greenways Commission, which was the first to use the term in the 1980s. The second, more recent definition refers to stormwater management practices that use vegetation, soil, and permeable surfaces to absorb runoff close to where it's generated. This definition has been advanced by EPA in particular. In reality, there's no sharp differentiation between these two definitions. In my mind, they form a continuum across scales, geographic scales from the region to the city, district, neighborhood, and site. So this slide shows a few examples of green infrastructure to regional and city scale. For example, farmland in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania in the upper right. And this next slide shows examples at the neighborhood, site, and building scale. For example, in the lower right, you see a pollinator-friendly green roof installation, and this is closer to the definition advanced by the Environmental Protection Agency. Regardless of scale, green infrastructure provides multiple benefits for people and ecosystems, which are often referred to as co-benefits. These co-benefits can be organized around the triple bottom line of sustainability: environmental, economic, and social. The social benefits are particularly evident in the realm of public health, which has certainly risen to the forefront during the current pandemic. So let me go through these three categories of co-benefits one at a time, starting with environmental. Green infrastructure is probably best known, as I've touched on, for its role in stormwater management. It also improves air and water quality, reduces the urban heat island effect, and plays a role in mitigating climate change by reducing energy consumption and sequestering carbon. Green infrastructure also provides benefits for the local economy. It creates business and job opportunities, stimulates retail sales. There was a study done that showed that businesses along tree-lined streets had higher revenues than along streets without trees, increases property values, attracts visitors, and puts money back into the economy by reducing costs from things such as energy, healthcare, and engineered infrastructure. Moving on to the social and public health co-benefits of green infrastructure, some examples include providing outdoor recreation opportunities, improving environmental quality and aesthetics, and also in connecting people to nature. There's a growing body of research on the benefits of green infrastructure and nature in general for mental and physical health. And the image you see in the bottom right is of forest bathing for health, a practice that originated in Japan and is increasing in popularity in this country. However, it's important to underscore that the co-benefits provided by green infrastructure are not shared equally by all racial, ethnic, and income groups. In fact, research has consistently shown that poor and minority neighborhoods have worse health outcomes and less access to parks, tree canopy, and other forms of green infrastructure. For example, there was a study in Oakland, California, which is shown on this slide, that found that tree canopy coverage ranged from 47% in a high-income council district, shown in dark green, to 12% in a low-income council district located right next to it. I'll now move on to Philadelphia as a case study for the application of green infrastructure. In Philadelphia, green infrastructure has two meanings that mirror the two definitions I shared earlier. The first is citywide open space and green resources such as parks and the urban tree canopy. And the second is green stormwater infrastructure at the site and neighborhood scales. Together, these make up a network that connects individual building parcels and sites, streets, neighborhoods, and districts to the city as a whole. The regulatory driver for Philadelphia's green infrastructure program was the Clean Water Act and the need to address sewer overflow into the Delaware and Schuylkill rivers during heavy rain events. To solve this problem, the city reached an agreement with EPA to invest $1.7 billion in green stormwater infrastructure over a 20-year period as an alternative to a gray infrastructure approach typically would be the installation of large underground storage tunnels. And in doing so, the city did a study of the co-benefits provided by green infrastructure. And the study found over the 20-year period an over $2 return on every $1 invested. Philadelphia's green infrastructure program, called Green City Clean Waters, dates back about 10 years and is led by the Philadelphia Water Department. Here's a palette of stormwater management tools that the Water Department and its partners are installing across the city. I won't get into the details, but for me, the key takeaway is how these tools integrate natural systems and processes into the built environment through both plantings and structural methods of retaining and slowing runoff. Moving up in scale, here are some larger components of Philadelphia's green infrastructure system. First are parks. This is a green stormwater installation, a rain garden and detention area in West Fairmount Park. Next are green schoolyards. Since 2012, the city has been partnering with the Trust for Public Land to transform asphalt paving into green parks and play areas, as shown by this local elementary school. And then next are green streets. I showed you earlier an image of a neighborhood green street. This is a view of street trees along the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, Philadelphia's grandest boulevard that terminates at the steps of the Art Museum. Speaking of trees, I would add tree canopy, the largest structural component of green infrastructure in cities, to this list of building blocks, and I'll come back to that a little later. I will conclude this segment on Philadelphia with a series of slides illustrating the Water Department's vision of what Philadelphia will look like transformed by infusing green infrastructure throughout its urban fabric. So this is a picture of an existing alley in Philadelphia. And this is an illustrative rendering of the same alley transformed with green stormwater infrastructure. Moving up in scale, this is an aerial view of a typical neighborhood in Philadelphia. And here is an illustrative rendering of the same neighborhood transformed with green streets, green roofs, community gardens, and a solar rooftop array. And finally, this is an existing view across Philadelphia looking towards the Delaware River. And here's an illustrative rendering of the same view transformed into what the original founder of Philadelphia, William Penn, termed a green country town. Let's now move on to smart cities. Here's a definition of smart cities from the Smart Cities Council. And if you look at this definition, you will see that it has two components. First is the use of information and communications technology to collect, communicate, and crunch or analyze data. And second are the outcomes that result, which the Smart Cities Council broadly defines as livability, workability, and sustainability. Now, the topic of smart cities can be highly technical, and here's a highly technical diagram of the performance domains covered by smart cities that was developed for an initiative led by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They call this the Internet of Things Enabled Smart City Framework. Fortunately, my friend Vatsal Bhatt from the U.S. Green Building Council simplified the diagram into something that is easier to understand. And I'd like to draw your attention to two key points. First, the diagram puts people at the center. Too often our focus is on the latest and greatest technology, and we forget that the purpose of the technology is to serve people's needs. Second, the diagram indicates domains or outcome areas in which technology can yield benefits for people. So these include traditional smart city domains like water, energy, and transportation, but also broader ones like education, health, prosperity, and equity. Making the connection to green infrastructure, I would assert that a smart city is a green city. And using Philadelphia as an example, focus specifically on the urban tree canopy. The U.S. Forest Service has developed a program called iTree, which, among other things, measures the benefits in monetary terms provided by urban trees. So this is from a study of Philadelphia's urban forest done back in 2012, when the city had about 2.9 million trees with a canopy coverage of about 20%. That's a pretty low compared to some other cities because of Philadelphia's dense development pattern. But let me draw your attention to selected benefits provided by the urban forest, which iTree allows you to measure. So these include air temperature reduction, removal of air pollutants, carbon storage and sequestration, reduced energy use, and stormwater management through rainfall interception. And the iTree analysis estimated the compensatory value of replacing the services provided by the urban forest of Philadelphia at $1.7 billion. However, the connection between green infrastructure and smart cities has rarely been made in practice. Two researchers, Nadina Gale and Sophie Nitoslawski, founded a studio they call the Internet of Nature to better make that connection, in their words, to explore the next frontiers in urban ecosystem management for smarter and greener cities. They also co-wrote an article that makes the case that digital technology can be used to improve the delivery of green infrastructure benefits. In this article, they cite Chicago's Smart Green Infrastructure Monitoring Pilot, which dates back to 2017. This project measured the performance of stormwater management strategies such as permeable pavement bioswales and rain gardens under different weather conditions. The project was the first to measure the performance of green infrastructure using sensors and cloud-based analytics, and the results demonstrated the effectiveness of green infrastructure as an approach. Let me conclude by looking into the future towards a much anticipated adoption of autonomous and connected vehicles, or AVs. While the timeline is currently uncertain, it's generally believed that widespread adoption will occur within several decades, for planners like me the time horizon of long-range plans, and that when it does happen, AVs will have potentially transformative impacts on the built environment of cities. What you see on the screen is a couple of resources prepared by the American Planning Association, where I served as research director, and this is a topic we certainly prioritized during my tenure there because of its importance for the future of planning. Focusing in on impacts of AVs on the built environment, a team of researchers from Florida State University identified 6 potential impacts, of which I find 3 to be particularly relevant to green infrastructure. First, AVs may create narrower and more efficient rights-of-way. Second, AVs could affect the location, design, and demand for parking, shifting it from central districts to more peripheral locations, reducing the size of parking garages and parking spaces, and potentially dramatically reducing demand. And third, reduced parking may open up redevelopment opportunities, particularly combined with a trend being accelerated by the pandemic, the replacement of bricks and mortar retail stores by e-commerce. The FSU team developed illustrative graphics that show potential connections to green infrastructure. So, for example, narrower rights-of-way would free up space for street trees, sidewalks, and green stormwater infrastructure, promoting green streets. Reduced parking demand would open up not only redevelopment opportunities, but also opportunities to deploy different types of green infrastructure to achieve the co-benefits I talked about earlier in the presentation. Now, there's been a lot of debate about what AVs will ultimately mean for the future of cities. At one extreme is the utopian view, a vision of an AV world with shared vehicles, fewer cars, reduced congestion, cleaner air, and better land use. At the other extreme is a dystopian vision of privately owned rather than shared vehicles, zero occupancy cars roaming the streets, more traffic, pollution, and sprawl. Undoubtedly, the ultimate outcome will be somewhere in between these two extremes. But I do think that planning, design, and policy change can scale up the use of green infrastructure to benefit people and communities. This before and after visualization from the Minnesota Design Center illustrates the opportunity AVs, a form of smart city technology, could provide to rethink the design of the built environment. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I think we now have a few minutes for questions and discussion. Again, thank you.